Well, when I began to think about the future as something that anthropology needs to pay more attention to, I quickly realized that it's a very big subject. And it could go in many directions, ranging from scenario building, predictions, to uh, efforts in various traditional societies to consult various kinds of experts, ritual experts, medical experts, to prognosticate about what is going to happen. Or in places like India, you have astrology and so on and so forth. That it's a very large range of practices and horizons. So I needed something to give some shape and structure, and also something which, some set of categories which were already familiar to us. Therefore, anticipation, imagination, came to mind, all three of them, as things that people understood, but which I saw as sort of ways in which future making was conducted and as it were, produced an assemblage, so that the future was never only about risk or uncertainty or danger, or only about hope and so on, or only about fear, that it could involve all these things depending on the situation. So it seemed to me that these three categories gave me some control over what was otherwise just a vast space, and each of them had some literature already. And that led me to think that it's not so much that anthropology has not thought about the future, but it has not thought about the future in a systematic way, or in a conscious way, or in a explicit way. And since your collective enterprise is about not just the future, but future making, that adds an interesting twist, because it puts agency of some type into the idea of the future. So the future does not appear as simply an objective reality which unfolds and then humans have to somehow respond, but rather that they craft it. Just as with the past, I think that takes some, it's a shift to say that the past is constructed or made. Likewise with the future, which sometimes presents itself as an objective unrolling, unfolding, in which we have to just adjust somehow. But the truth is, it's a social product. And that is why anticipation, imagination, those are all verbs also to me. They are things you do. They're not just faculties or capacities in the head. They are actions or activities or practices or labors. And they all lead one, I would say, to some idea of how futures do get made. The other thought for me in the idea of future making, which is in your project so central, is it, in addition to highlighting agency, also draws attention to my major interest, which is that the making can yield very different futures. So that the future is not a single thing that different societies or cultures, as it were, discover. Is that they actually produce these things, and the complexity of course is that what is thus produced, the futures that are made and therefore become present or have a chance to become the present, are not always attractive, because human beings are not all seeing, all wise, or all prudent. They may produce futures that are actually very worrisome. And that happens. So one thing perhaps that I did not emphasize enough in the future as cultural fact is that there's always a struggle between futures that are equitable, sustainable, inclusive, and futures that are exclusionary, violent, discriminatory, etc. That battle is also one we see going on. For example, in the turn to the right in Europe or elsewhere in the world, there's a battle, which is also a battle about which futures will get made. Yeah, so the first thing is just to it'd be good to recall what I meant in making that distinction was that the future as probability for me is the future that seems to engulf us and appears these days in what Ian Hacking called the avalanche of numbers, that statistical projections dominate our lives. And of course, Ulrich Beck also said that we're living in a world in which the future as produced by science and the state now appears to us as a natural fact, but actually it's a staged fact, as he put it. And that kind of staged fact is, to me, the future as probability, the thing that is said to be very likely to happen. Possibility, for me, puts the emphasis on human actors, human agency, and human capacities, as opposed to some kind of objective unfolding force which simply drowns you in numbers and what is behind those numbers, as if we can do nothing about it. So possibility for me opens up agency, collaboration, participation, and let's call it empowerment for ordinary people. That's the sense that you can make your own future, that the future is not simply an objective fact that rushes at you and you have to just react or respond or protect yourself, but rather you can make. So for me, the relationship is that, the question you ask, what is the relationship, is that seeing that the future, that there are possible futures which are not exhausted or defined by probable futures, is to be the space of politics, where we actually elect to do things that we may wish, even if the probabilities are against us. So to me, that's the connection, that the one is the landscape against which the other works and should work politically. Yeah, I do indeed argue that it's unevenly distributed, and that uneven distribution is not a matter of mental capacity or intelligence. So it's not a culture of poverty kind of argument or a racist argument. It simply says that being poor means you have less opportunity to practice that capacity, to use it, and to have examples of it, and to draw on that archive of experiences to build new experiences. You just have less of that. That is the nature of poverty. So the question becomes how we get from A to B. And there it seems to me the question of dreamscapes becomes important as a kind of transition point between whatever the capacity to aspire, the distribution is, and actual achievement, that something is there in between. Of course, there are many things in between, institutional things, historical things which are already in place, which can't be easily adjusted. Many things are there, but I would also say these dreamscapes, as Sheila Jasanoff talks about them, are certainly relevant. The idea of dreamscape echoes the use of scapes in my earlier work, so I'm pleased about that, and I see a lot of convergence between that idea and also my own interest in alternative modernities and things like that. So I think they're very highly compatible. The dreamscapes are indeed sites of contestation. So indeed you have multiple dreams. You may have dreams that replicate the West, for example, in Africa, and therefore don't work because the conditions of their realization are not there, but the dream is there. My view is that the major conflict in a city like Mumbai, but it could be true in Africa, it could be true anywhere, is not between dreams and reality, but between dreams and other dreams. So that reality, so to speak, is actually produced by the contestation between dreamscapes. So the real is actually a kind of, the real, you might say with a capital R, is a sedimentation of the battlefield of dreams. In one sense, is a very widespread observation. In fact, it's almost the main observation about the digital era, is its density, the way it saturates us, and its speed, and its ubiquity. There's no escape, it's very fast, and it's all around us. These are observations shared by Evgeny Morozov and by Virelio and by Nick Mirzo. It's a very widespread feeling. My sense is, obviously there's some merit to this. It's true in some sense. But I also think I am convinced actually that important aspects of this are part of the self-produced ideology of the information industry. So we have to be very careful what is actually the case and what is the thing that we are being told. So we have to find some way to connect the density, speed, and force of the information bomb to contemporary capitalism and its operations, and that draws our attention to the fact that these are not natural facts, they're also things being promoted as such in the amount or force of this information coming at us. But the fact that many of these machineries, industries, and interests who are behind these things actually take our attention away from many things which are not working, which are very slow, which are unavailable. And in fact, it may be that those are very important because they reveal the contradictions of all this to us, those slownesses, failures, and breakdowns. But these industries don't want us to think about that. They want us to see it as a seamless, endless, high-speed thing that we better get on board quickly. And again. In other words, because it's moving, we have to redesign ourselves to again be on board. So I think having a critical relationship to that phenomenon is very important. Of course, someone like Viridio does, but I would slightly differ with him on where the danger is. Well, I think you cover a lot of ground, but maybe I can just go back to the general project, of future making with an African reference, and with particular reference to Africa. I just think this is a highly commendable thing, and it's also very timely because there are all these interesting debates and discussions and conversations between people, let's say, one or other way taking on the kind of Afro-pessimism side, and then the kind of Afro-optimism, but also Afro-futurism. Obviously, social science has to be somewhere in the middle of that space. Its business is not to create futuristic entertainment, nor is it to kill all hope, but it is to provide a kind of critical understanding of the possibilities. And in Africa, it seems to me, the big challenge is of course African diversity, so that the situation in, say, Central African Republic, or what used to be Central African Republic, and what is the case in, say, South Africa or Nigeria, extremely different stories. But there's no getting away from the fact that the continent has a very long history of interactions, a long history of shared imperial presence, and a very big bunching up of countries, nations, societies at the very far low end of the human development scale. I mean, so one has to recognize that something is there which is highly needy of change, critique, and transformation.